Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of Pod Save Chocolate. My name is Clay Gordon. I'm your host, and today we're going to finish up a four-part series about equipping a chocolate workshop. Before I get into that, I want to remind everybody that this episode of Pod Save Chocolate, like every episode, is sponsored by the members of the Chocolate Life. So go over there now and become a member and support the work that we're doing here. You can also, anybody who's watching this during the live episode, can go into the live chat on YouTube or in the comments or LinkedIn or Facebook and add a comment and a question, and I will get that asked and hopefully answered during the course of the episode. And if you just want to give a shout out where in the world you're connecting from, I'll get that up on the screen as well. Right, so just a quick, this is the homepage of the Chocolate Life right now, and here is the post for today's episode that I have put together. So episode 102, it's hard to imagine I'm already at 102 episodes in a little over a year. So we're equipping a startup craft chocolate business. And so this is, I said, the fourth episode in a series. Episode 99 was about equipping the ultimate workshop, which means no expense was spared in my mind about the equipment, the major equipment that I was doing, the CapEx budget on major equipment. And also there was no retail component to this. This was out the back door. This was a wholesale and online business only. I then followed it up with equipping a budget workshop. And contrary to what some people were thinking about, I did not focus on creating the lowest cost business. I didn't focus on what is the minimum amount of CapEx investment that I can do. I'm creating a business that I want to run and I'm going to be involved in. And also I wanted to focus on there being a dedicated attached retail component to what I was doing. So this is a chocolate and confectionery workshop with retail that I would want to own. Episode 101, which is part 2 of the budget workshop, was equipment that would fill out the offering. So if I am a chocolate maker, and I asked myself, what can I do with the chocolate that I make rather than saying I'm a bean to bar chocolate maker and I'm going to focus on bars? What are the other equipment that I want to have in my workshop, which is, again, a part of the retail business? But Mike King of Encore Coffee and Chocolate wrote to me and said, hey, Clay, when you stated budget workshop, what I was looking forward to was hearing opinions on best value. So which I would think of as price performance. Right. And so that is today's episode. Right. I'm going to be talking about those things. And I'm going to be taking a slightly different approach this week or this episode, which is I'm going to take two options and I'm going to compare them. And I'm going to say, this is where I would come out on this. Now, your mileage may vary. Your situation may be a little different. But I wanted to really walk through my reasoning for why I would choose one piece of equipment over another piece of equipment or go one way over another way. So that's that. But before I begin, I want to point out, again, one of the reasons why there is this post on the Chocolate Life is that what you can do is, if you're listening, you can follow along on your computer, or you can go and you can look at these things and at any point after the episode, right? So you don't have to follow along on the URLs or write anything down. All of the links to everything I'm going to talk about are in this post, right? And you can go back and review them at any time that you want to. And speaking of which, hey, here's Mike from Encore Coffee and Chocolate in Kansas City, Missouri. And Mike, this is your episode. I'm working on this episode for you. I'm answering your question about value, about price performance, right? So given with a particular budget. Now, I did not set myself a budget going in. So I said, listen, I only have $50,000 or only have $20,000. I only have X amount of dollars. What I said was, I want to compare two different pieces of equipment, give you my thinking on why I might go one way or another. And what you can do is you can say, oh, I understand the logic, Clay, for what it is that you're doing. And you can apply that to your purchasing process, right? And you may decide that it's worth it to spend more money, or you really are constrained to spending less money, right? Or you might have another way of going. And I may have a specific piece of equipment. You may go, I like the idea, but maybe not that specific equipment. So these are just generic recommendations in many cases, although in some cases they are very, very specific recommendations. And I do want to point out, and you probably can't read this, so I'm going to make it a little bigger. Um, Hold on a second. Not entirely sure why that's there, but doing something behind the screens, something to. So I want to point out a couple of things. And the first one is that there is an underlying assumption behind everything that I'm doing here. And that underlying assumption is that even if you are not paying yourself, so even if you're not drawing a salary, even if you're not getting a wage, what you need to do is you need to keep track of the amount of money that it would cost if you had to pay somebody else to do the work you're doing. So that's just an underlying assumption, no matter what you're doing, right? If you're in a startup, you may not be taking a salary, very, very common. Or for weeks or months, or until you become profitable, you may not be paying yourself on a regular basis. Very, very common, right? But at least keep track of it. And one of the reasons why is that when you do your cost of goods calculations, you need to add the cost of labor into them. And because if you don't include it in your cost of goods calculations, when you go and work from what it costs you to your wholesale to your resale prices, you're not including all of the cost factors which you need to in order to be able to have a good reliable costing basis. And so what you may find is that if you don't incorporate what would have been your salary had you paid yourself, right, that when you go and start selling, you're actually not making enough money, right? You're actually because you're actually not charging enough for your product. So hopefully that all makes sense, but it is an assumption here, right? The other assumption here is, right, what I want to do is I want to think about the cost of labor, right? In a world where you cannot control the cost of ingredients, you have no control over what the cost of cocoa is. You have no control over the cost of cocoa butter and things like that, right? That the one thing you do have control over is the cost of labor. And so I am often very willing, just generally, to spend a little bit more for a piece of equipment that I know will reduce the amount of labor. It may sound crazy, but an hour here and there, but every time I do a task can add up to thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars over the course of a year. So think about it that way. So with that, what I want to do is present two different approaches to roasting, right? So one of them is going to be this is going to be the Be More 2000 AB. Many people go this direction, the Be More. However, I understand that this model has a roughly 1 pound or half kilo, actually less than half a kilo capacity. And so what I want to point out here is that even though these things are relatively inexpensive, maybe like $400 or under $500, if what you want to do is you have a machine, some sort of refiner, which you've got a 15 kilo recipe at 70%, you need roughly 10 kilos of nibs. That if you need 10 kilos of nibs and you can only roast at half a kilo at a time, minus 15% or whatever it is for cracking and winnowing, you're doing a lot of roasting. You're spending a lot of time roasting. Now, because these things are so cheap, you can buy 3 or 4 or 5 of them, for like under $2,000, but you're doing it. So this is a very, very low cost entry level item on an individual basis, right? And it may make sense if you're experimenting at home and you've got an 8-pound grinder and you're just making for yourself. But when you get into production, it turns out that you're spending a lot of time roasting for any particular batch of chocolate. You've got to work on multiple roasters at the same time. You're spending a lot of time doing it, which is the point. Now, if it were me, and I'm thinking about a chocolate workshop, right? I would want to, if I went with a Be More, I would also want to have a countertop convection oven, right? So this is one from Breville. The jewel part of it is that there's a thermocouple which goes in, which you can use to measure the temperature of whatever you're doing. So if you were to put multiple air fryer baskets in here, so here's the air fryer basket down here, you got multiple air fryer baskets, then what you can do, then what you can do is you can be roasting on a couple of different pans at the same time. Your capacity is going to be greater, I believe, than the B-more is. Your roasting profiles are going to be very different. That's very, very true, right? But when you're not using this as a roaster, you can use it as a dehydrator. You can bake brownies in it. You can bake cookies in it. You can do lots and lots of things with it. So I want that flexibility, and I believe that on a batch per batch basis, this would have a higher capacity than the B-more, right? So if I were presented with this and space and budget were limited, I would be tend to go with a countertop convection oven that have a thermoprobe. There are less expensive versions of this that do not have the thermocouple. And this one has a connected app that allows you to do a lot of things, not necessarily appropriate for chocolate making, most of them, but the ability to put a thermocouple into the beans and be able to measure the temperature on the app is a good thing. Now, I don't believe the app controls the oven, right? But you do have that capability. So both of these are good solutions. They're not bad solutions. Many people go with the B-more ovens. I believe, Mike, you started out with one of them, if I recall correctly. Many people do them. There are many people who continue to use them even as they scale up into larger production. But ultimately, they are inefficient, and it will cost a lot more, right? In terms of energy. So this is not an energy efficient way to scale up, but for a startup, it's a great way to go. It is. I mean, the less expensive way to do this is just to use the convection oven in the kitchen that you already have, or the countertop convection oven that you already have, right? I would invest in something a little bit more than that. If you want to have a small drum roaster, you can have a small drum roaster. I mean, both of these things are $500 or less, as I believe. If you want to get the next step up, is going to be several thousands of dollars, maybe $5,000 to $10,000. So this is a good entry level way of thinking about things. Okay, all right. Now, next step is cracking and winnowing. So when I started off doing the cracking and winnowing, I used a Crankenstein and a hairdryer. And I think many people do that, you go that way. Again, just an insane amount of labor. And the Crankenstein, which was originally designed for cracking barley for brewing, it turns out that it's an okay machine for cracking cocoa. There are cocoa specific ones, but it's not good. The gap between the rollers is not adjustable, and you'll often find that there are a lot of uncracked beans, and you need to run through them again. If you're hand cranking it, it's one thing. If you're running it with a drill, that's another. Having something which is better motorized as a DIY component would make it better, right? But the Crankenstein, which is in the $300-400 range, last I looked, before you added all the things, added all the extras that you need to make it work, is an entry-level device. It's not here. It's not recommended here because I just think, again, you're spending a lot of time working with it, fiddling with it, and I want to focus on productivity versus the absolute lowest cost. So I wouldn't go that way. Having owned one, had used one for 3, 4, 5 years, it's not what I would choose now to go and do it, right? So if you want a more conventional machine, this mini cracker winnower from DCM has got a roughly 10 to 15 kilogram an hour throughput. It's compact, as you can see. It's, I don't know, about $4,000 if I recall correctly. It's about $1,000 less than the next one up, if I recall correctly. What's missing here is that you do need to have a shop vac, and a shop vac with a dust collection system in front of it. So it's not as compact as it looks, number one. And shop vacs have a tendency to be really noisy. I did speak with Bhavani about this, and he found that squirrel fans and other kinds of fans, which you often find in dust collectors, don't work very efficiently with this machine. So you are going to need to devote a little bit more space, and you're going to have something which generates a lot of noise, this shop vac. Now, the shop vac could be a multitasker, because you could be using the shop vac. You could detach it and use it to clean up your space, which would be totally legitimate. But if I had one of these, I would want to put it in a small room, which was soundproofed, because I don't like listening to these things for hours at a time. But that is a really, really good. So it can run on a home vacuum. That's new. The Miele Canister C1 is not an inexpensive vacuum. All right. So just keep in mind that there's going to be more that you need in order to get this working at an average rate of 10 to 15 kilos per hour. So the cracker itself is very quiet. The vacuum is much louder. This is not a bad option. I personally have taken a look at the bigger machine, the full-size machine, which is roughly 40 kilos an hour. And when it is tuned, it is an incredibly efficient cracker and winnower. So I really like it. One thing to consider, and this is something that I talked about last couple of times, was there's an Italian company called Conversi. They make both a 10 and kilo integrated cracker winnower. Here's what it looks like. There's one basket over here for shell and fines, and one basket here on the other side for nibs. This is very, very quiet, and it is set to roughly 10 kilograms an hour. And it's about the same price as the full-size DCM machine, but it is much quieter. So something to consider. But right, so we then need to think about the throughput. So 10 to 15 kilos an hour. So if I'm doing, half a kilo a batch coming out of my B-more, I need to do 20 batches, 20 roasts to be able to get 10 kilos an hour out of either of these machines. I'm just saying, right? We need to think about this. Unfortunately, there's not much of anything other than a conventional convection oven, which is going to get you to this sort of, I can do 5 or 10 kilos in 1 roast or 2 roasts. So this is a mismatch in terms of throughput that you need to take into consideration when you're doing this, right? You're saving a lot of money here, but you're spending a lot of time doing your roasting. Mike asked the question, is there a difference in technology? I don't see the larger winnowers vacuum based. So what I can tell you, Mike, is that every winnower that I have seen has a vacuum somewhere in it, because you need to create a flow which is going to extract the light shell from the nibs that are coming through. So even if you don't see the vacuum, there is a vacuum there. Some of them are very visible. I mean, there is a DIY thing that you can do, and I didn't put it in here, but you can do a DIY thing, is that there is a seed cleaner, which is very, very commonly used, and there are a lot of people who have used it for cocoa. However, you need to manually feed the nibs, the cracked nibs. And so it's not an integrated cracker winnower. It is, I have a cracker and then I have a winnower, right? But I can build the DIY winnower for just a couple hundred bucks in parts. And there is a vacuum somewhere in every single one of these devices, just to let you know. So is there a difference in the technology? Almost all of them are going to use some method of pinching the beans, or there are some that scrape the beans against a surface. So they're all using that. There are also called impact crackers, which is another thing entirely. They take the beans and they fling the beans against a hard surface, and the beans just break into pieces. That is, nobody's making a small one anymore. So Prefix Equipment, which used to be part of 24, but came out of 24 Blackbirds in Santa Barbara, was making a couple of small impact crackers. I don't believe they're making anymore. I think Prefix is no longer in business, right? But what I will do is I will add a link to this DIY seed cleaner. It's a winnower. And what I'll do is I'll do a Frankenstein, a seed cleaner combination, right? So you can do that. But when you think about it, Mike, how would you go about separating the nib and the fines from the shell bits? And that's all done with a vacuum. Just a question of where that vacuum is, right, in the process. And many cases, there are multiple vacuums, something else to consider. So Jeffrey from Marsata Chocolate in Torrance, California. Chef, how are you today? Back in 2007, used a Frankenstein and a busser's tray with a shop vac, but of course, reversed the air hose so it's blowing, made sure the bus tray was at a certain angle. The nibs, which of course were heavier, and the chaff skin would float to the top and dissipate all over the parking lot. Yes, if you try to do this indoors, even in a bathtub or some sort of shower enclosure, it's going to get really, really messy. If you're going to use a hair dryer or a shop vac and you're going to use this method, right, you do need to do it outdoors. What a mess. Never wasted the chaff and skin. Always had beautiful, robust lemon trees. Yes, absolutely. You can use the fines and the skin. You can use it as a compost. Careful to keep dogs away from it. If it gets wet, it will start generating this really, really wonderful mildew carpet or mold carpet. There's more theobromine in the shells than there is in the seeds. So in the beans. So you need to be careful about that. But yeah, and you could also sterilize that. Pick it up, sterilize it, and then make tea from it. Always something to do. But I will add in this DIY seed cleaner and a Frankenstein as the absolutely low cost option. It will end up costing you under $1,000, including a drill to be able to run the thing if you don't want to run it by hand, right? So refining and conching. So number one thing is you need to have a grind gauge, right? You don't want a micrometer, you want a grind gauge. And this is going to help you say, I've refined it properly. Now, there are two approaches at the small end. There are no low-cost ball mills, right? And a low-cost ball mill would require a dedicated conch. And so there is no low-cost option for ball mill conch at this level, for a startup level. I take that back. I mean, the company that I'm working with in Turkey does a lab scale ball mill, which is in the 5 to 7 kilogram range, and then you can get a conch associated with it, and so you can do one batch in 2 hours or so at 7 kilos, and there is a separate conch, and I think it may end up costing somewhere between $50,000 and $20,000. I haven't taken a look at the current prices. But I think that there are other concerns, like ball mills are relatively difficult to clean. So I'm not going to recommend it. So the traditional way to do this would be a little melanger. So this is the DCM20 melanger. It has roughly an 11 kilogram capacity, right? And so it turns out that this 11 kilogram capacity is roughly in line with the DCM Breeze Mini. So that makes a lot of sense if I'm doing a 70% recipe, right? The challenge is that the next size up is the 22 kilo batch, which is the 50, right? And if this were me, right? If I were to go and do this, then what I would want in, one of the things that is available on the 50 and larger are the options for the rapid refiner and for the pneumatic pressure, right? The pneumatic pressure, it's a really, really geeky thing, but what is it? Make sure that the gap between the stones, the grinding stones and the base remains constant as the size of the particle changes, which doesn't happen in a manually tensioned machine. I would want it as well. And the rapid refiner just enables you to bring the temperature up and control the temperature, right? Which should reduce the amount of time it takes to do the flavor development part of conching. So something to consider. I wouldn't want a 20 because it doesn't offer the option of a pneumatic, of the pneumatic tensioning or the rapid refiner. You could go with a 20, but what you're looking at is processing times of 3 days, 2 to 3 days in it, right? Whereas you can cut this to 2 days at the most with the next size up machine, but then you're talking about a lot of roasting to go for. So it has this ripple effect backwards that you need to be very, very careful of. So that's it. Many people start off with these little small refiners. This might be great if you're doing this for a hobby level business. They're relatively inexpensive. They're under 500, as you can see here. This is the 10-pound machine. They also make an 8-pound machine. You can upgrade this with, stainless steel bits on the inside of it. This is great when you're just starting off, right? And they're relatively inexpensive, if that's what you're doing. However, if what you want to do is you want to create a craft chocolate business that you can scale up, going from one of these to 5 of these things, even if you're only spending, less than $2,000, you're still talking about insane amounts of labor, right? And in the end, any dollar that you save on buying 5 of these or 6 of these or 7 of these things, right? You will lose because of the amount eventually because of the amount of labor that you're spending. And so if you are going to do this, if you're going to be in a melanger, buying one of these early on just to get your hands in, get your feet wet, to do some amounts of recipe development to get an idea about things, these make an enormous amount of sense, but then move into the larger machine. The larger machine is going to give you the production capacity necessary to be able to produce the chocolate. So this is one of the challenges I had, for example, with the Mass Brothers when they were talking about making their chocolate, which is that what they did is they had an ECGC, so a Cocoa Town ECGC 65, which is roughly a 35 kilo per batch machine, but each machine was dedicated to a different chocolate. So they had 20 $10,000 machines, right, lined up, right, and each one of them had a barrel that wobbled differently, so it was really hypnotic to watch, right? But it's the least energy efficient way to scale production. And when you think about it, you could have 35 kilos out of 20 machines. That's 700 kilos every 3 days, right? If you were running all of them. Of course, you didn't need to run all of them, right? But each one of them has its own separate motor. It's putting out a lot of heat. Your AC requirements are much higher. And so when you're thinking about this, you need to be careful about all of total cost of ownership, not just CapEx, right? And so what I want is a reasonable amount of production for a certain energy budget, as well as everything else, right? So the great thing about this is, this is going to cost me $350. I can go into a DCM 20. I'm trying to think, it's like $5,000. I mean, these are inexpensive, right? That way to do it. But if I were to go and I would run this to the next larger machine, so I could get the pneumatic device as well as the rapid refiner. But at which point I really need to go to the next size up. I'm no longer at the Breeze Mini. I'm at the larger machine in order to be able to keep up with the production of this machine. And I really got to reconsider my roasting options as well, right? So these things are all interdependent of what's going on. And the challenge is that, very few people are thinking about what how much throughput do I need for this device, and what does that mean for the devices on either side of it, right? So I just want to go that way. So if I had to spend the money, right, even though it is going to be more expensive. Actually, what's really interesting, this R15 from Conversitech, when you go to the DCM 50, which is again, roughly which is a 22 kilogram machine as opposed to a 15 kilogram machine. If I were to go to the DCM 50 and then add the pneumatic tension pressuring system and add the rapid refiner, it would be more expensive than this machine. So interesting, right? So we need to look at CapEx from all of the accessories. So this is 15 kilos a batch. Right now there are Teflon rollers in it. You can get stone rollers in it and stainless steel rollers, depending on what you're building. But this is a fan in it, and it runs as a conch. There is water around the outside, which is used to control temperature. You can get this up to 70 degrees centigrade. It's front emptying, right? This glass front is optional, so you can see what it is that's going on. There's a sample port right here on the side of it. So if you open it up, chocolate will come out, so you can taste it for what's going on. But more importantly, the entire lid opens up. This lid hinges on this side here, and you can pull out the refiners or the rollers, and you can clean them. So if you are looking at how long does it take to clean out my melanger so that I can go from dark chocolate to white chocolate, right? It takes a while, right? And this is a way of making that process much shorter. So the time involved again, because we're focusing to some extent on labor. What are the choices around labor, right, that affect total cost of ownership? All right. So if it were me, I would use this machine over a small melanger. Now, you may be comfortable with the melanger. I mean, they're straightforward. They're so easy to use and understand. That's one of the reasons why people love them. It's just like, oh, this makes sense to me. There's nothing, it's like, nothing special about, the technology. Ball mills are a little harder, to understand how they work. Universals are a little more difficult. But for me, um, what I'm looking at is I want the ability, for example, to put these Teflon rollers are sort of optimized for processing nut pastes as opposed to the stone rollers, which would be optimized for producing chocolate. So I'm going to go that way. Now, one of the reasons why I might go with the Conversitech, this little cracker winnower, either the 10 kilo or the 30 kilo. And at this point, the 30 kilo is not that much bigger, right? And it's not that much more expensive. I think it's like €1,000 more expensive than the 10. So I would get the larger one just to build throughput capacity in, just saying. It says one shot machine. They don't mean one shot the way we would mean one shot as a depositor. But this one will also work with nuts. So if I have a convection oven and I put nuts in my air frying pans, what I can then do is do the cracking. I can extract the shells, do all that kind of stuff in this one as well. So it becomes a multitasker, right? Again, I want to do nut paste. I want to do nut and chocolate, a spalmabile, a spread, right? And things like that. And so for me, having the ability to process the nuts in this machine is an extra reason to have it um, beyond beyond just handling cocoa nibs, cocoa beans and cocoa nibs. So just thinking about it. But keep in mind that every single decision we make here in refining and conching in terms of capacity, right, has an effect on cracking and winnowing capacity, has an effect on roasting capacity, right? And what we want to do is we want to balance all of those things to the best we can, as considering how much time does it take me in terms of watching the machines. If you have to hand fill this little DIY seed cleaner, because there is no auto filling mechanism, and you're doing 20 kilos an hour and you have to do 50 kilos of product, that's 2.5 hours. If you're paying yourself $20 an hour burdened, you got to consider employment tax, FICAs, all that kind of stuff, right? If you're thinking about all those things, that $20 an hour, that means for every hour you spend hand feeding, right, roasted and cracked cocoa beans into this little DIY seed cleaner, which you can make for $200, right? You are, that you have to add that on, right, to the cost of that aspect of production. And so it makes sense to invest a little more in machines which auto feed themselves, for want of a better term. So this DCM Breeze Mini, it has a hopper. You put beans in the hopper, it'll take care of itself until the hopper is empty. You've got these Conversitech machines, they have hoppers, right? And it'll feed itself until the hopper is empty, right? And one of the reasons why you have challenges with the little DIY seed cleaner is there's no airtight seal. So the vacuum is pulling air from places you don't want it to pull. So it's not as efficient. It's not effective because it's not the system hasn't been designed to do what it is that we're being asked to do. Right. So hopefully all that makes sense. If anybody has a question about any of this, Chef Gardner, thank you very much for sharing your experiences with this. I had those experiences as well when I was giving classes with Jeff Pazina of Cotton Tree Lodge in Harlem. We used to take everything up to the roof of his building to do the separation. Right. There are other inexpensive crackers and winnowers. Again, these are my recommendations. Here's my thinking for how you want to evaluate the decision, right, about what makes sense for your situation. And I'm telling you, this is what I would do, right? If I am roughly in this Conversitech R15, this DCM20, in terms of batch size. It's going to take 3 days in the DCM. And so if I can get through the roasting and the cracking and winnowing in 3 days, you know, that's a bonus, right? But if I'm doing the Conversitech and it takes me less than 24 hours to run a batch, which is what it will do in this machine, then I need to think about what my cracking, winnowing. I want to get all my cracking and winnowing and all my roasting done within the time it takes to process a batch. So just quick note on that. Otherwise, you'll always be behind and it's not going to be very fun. Let me close this. Tempering. So I'm going to break this up into two different categories: continuous tempering and batch tempering. Right. So one of the concerns that I have when it comes to continuous tempering machines is that small machines don't have a tempering pipe which is long enough to be able to properly temper 2-ingredient chocolate, right? When the butter content in the beans is fairly low. So if you're in the 47 to 50%, it's iffy. And I learned this firsthand working for FBM. So we had sold a compata to a craft chocolate company in the Northeast, and they were having intermittent results with getting the chocolate to temper properly in the compata. This was the original 12 kilo compata before FBM put it to a 15 kilo compata with a longer tempering pipe. And the reason why is there just wasn't enough time in the tempering pipe for the crystals to form and to be scraped and mixed into the chocolate properly. And if you had a low fat, low cocoa butter content bean, it was much, much harder. Even if you slowed the auger down and gave it more time, it didn't work consistently. Now, so let's talk about it from the smallest one. So one of the smallest continuous tempering machines on the market is the FBM Aura. It's a 4 kilogram working bowl. There are no attachments for this. It comes out here. You can interrupt the flows. So if you're doing, you can do time depositing into molds, but you can't attach anything else. And I can guarantee if you're working with 2-ingredient chocolate, that the literally, I think that the tempering pipe here is less than 30 centimeters long, like 12 inches. It is too short to be able to temper 2-ingredient chocolate. And again, I sold one of these to someone who wanted to do it. Sorry, Scott. Long time ago, and we found the same thing. It would work for some chocolates, for some beans, and not for others, right? Also, this is relatively expensive. Last time I looked, this was over 6,000 euros, 6,900 euros, right? And so it's not cheap for this capacity. I can also tell you from firsthand experience, it's not fun to work on. If you have to replace a compressor, you have to replace internal components. It's very, very tight inside. Listen, I represented FBM from 2012 to 2019, through the end of 2019. A lot of respect for the company and what they've done. Had a great time, enjoyed it. But I'm just saying that if you're looking to temper for a continuous tempering machine for 2-ingredient chocolate, I would not recommend this one. It's relatively expensive, but hard earned lesson, right? So another one, and this is one that I talked about in a previous episode, is this ICB Choco Temper. Now, again, the tempering pipe here is way too short, right? It is about the same price as the FBM machine. It's a much larger capacity, which it's a 10 kilo capacity, which might be good for what it is that you're doing. There's a time depositor. It's interruptible. I don't think, given the way the pipe here is constructed, you would need to put together a DIY pipe so that you could put a depositing head on it. It may or may not be generating enough pressure to do that. It's quite possible. But one of the reasons why you might want to do something like that is that you can get an enrober belt for it, right? And so if you can make a product, so you can, with a ganache or some other sort of center, you can do relatively small quantities. These are higher margin items than chocolate bars. Just to let you know, you can do chocolate covered fruit. There are many things, chocolate covered cookies. There are many things you can do with a device like this. And so if I had to choose between an Aura and this ICB machine, even though the ICB is more expensive, right? It's double the capacity, so it's not twice the cost the tempering machine is. I would not be doing two ingredient chocolate for the most part, right? Or I would temper it a different way for the two ingredient chocolate, right? But the ability to add the enrobing belt would say, okay, I have this other kind of capability, which is going to provide me with multiple revenue streams, and I'm going to go that way. Right. So that would be my choice. If I had to make a choice between the Aura and something else, the addition of these accessories would make it much more interesting for me, right? And I would think about the difference in cost, not all that different when you think about the capacity, but when I can add multiple product lines, right? I can add multiple things. It becomes a really worthwhile investment to consider. Again, 10 kilograms. It might be possible to actually hand temper a two ingredient chocolate, right? So using silk and then put it into here and keep it in temper. That's something to consider. Something to consider. Right? Just we'll figure it out. Now, um, if I were to think about, primarily I'm bar depositing, but what I want a lot of capacity, right? Now, one of the challenges with this machine is you cannot put um, you can put a depositing head on it. You attach it right here, right? You attach it right here. You put a depositing head on it. But what you can't do is you can't put an enrobing belt on it. So this is for tempering and depositing, but it is a fully automatic continuous tempering machine. The working bowl is at 24 kilos, and it's got a price of under 10,000 pounds. So compare that with the Aura, which is 4 kilogram working bowl at 7,000 euros, around 7,000 euros. You can see from a capacity perspective, this is a no brainer, right? So if I wasn't worried about enrobing, or I was okay with hand dipping things, which is not a bad way to start, this would be a choice that I would take a look at. It's relatively easy to clean. You can pull it apart, and my sense is that this is the auger is long enough to temper many, but not all, two ingredient chocolates. So I just want to go there. So it is this. Okay, if I'm making a high viscosity chocolate, a two ingredient dark chocolate, a three ingredient milk chocolate, right? These small, right, relatively inexpensive continuous tempering machines may not work for you, right? And it's really, really important to know that as you go into the purchasing process, is that the machine may not be technically capable of tempering the chocolate, right? Because the tempering pipe is too short and there's not enough dwell time of the chocolate in the pipe to generate the crystals on the interior surface of the pipe, to scrape them up in the auger and to mix them into the chocolate evenly before it gets to the top of the tempering pipe, right? It, it it's thermodynamics, right? Just a really, really simple example of thermodynamics. And there are a number of, this is something that it took me 2 years to learn, right? So somebody came to me when I was representing FBM and they said, listen, I want to buy this machine. And I said, are you making two ingredient chocolate? Because they want what's called the craft chocolate upgrade on the machine. And I would say, you do not want these machines. You want the next size up. And then FBM upsized all of their smallest machines, other than the smallest one, whose name escapes me at the moment. They went from 10 to 12 kilos, but the the pipe, I believe, is too short. But when they went from 12 to 15, and then from then to 25 on the Unica, that the tempering pipe was long enough in all of those machines to handle two ingredient chocolate, especially with the craft chocolate upgrade. What the craft chocolate upgrade was a different motor in it, so it could develop a lot of torque at low RPM, because what you do is you could slow the pipe so the chocolate spent more time in the pipe, generating more crystals. This is something that Dan Radigan and I spent a long time with at French Broad, figuring out why they couldn't temper a three ingredient milk chocolate in a standard Unica. There just wasn't enough time to generate all the crystals given the formulation of the chocolate. Yeah. All right. So that's it. Think about the chocolate that you are going to be making, and before you decide what is the right tempering machine for you, and then what are the applications. Right. Um, The Aura is not the cheapest option, but it is the smallest option. The Ice Choco to the ICB Choco Temper is roughly double the working bowl capacity of the FBM. Again, it's got a very short auger, so I would want, added cocoa butter chocolate, but relatively inexpensively add an enrober on the top, and I got lots more products that I can create. So I would, if I was looking for low budget compact, that would be the way I go. If I was focusing on bar production and I was pulling chocolate out of it for hand dipping and things like that, then the Infinity BX would be the way I go. And if I'm doing bar depositing, whoops, that's not what I want to talk about. I got the wrong URL. I will fix this. I've been doing some this. Go to Fairback Engineering and get one of their depositing heads custom for your mold. Right? If their edge to edge and deposit to deposit consistency is going to save you a lot of time in making your bars. And I thought I checked every one of these URLs. Right? But if you have questions, I mean, Mike, you're there. Still, is this the kind of question? Am I answering the questions you wanted the way you were hoping that I would answer the question in the second episode, the one on just budget chocolate making for the first time? Hopefully this is answering these things the way you want me to. So let's talk about batch tempering, right? So if I am starting out, right, there are one way to think about tempering would be using cocoa butter silk. So cocoa butter silk is tempered cocoa butter. You add the cocoa butter in relatively small amounts, 0.5 to 1% by weight, right? And then you mix it into the chocolate, and your chocolate is tempered and you can use it right away. You do have the requirement to keep the tempered chocolate at the right temperature. That's really, really important. But when you're doing it, you're talking entirely about if you're doing molds, it's like, how do you fill the molds? So now you need some sort of device to fill the molds. You could be doing flood and scrape. That makes sense. Lots of ways to do that. But you do have that. And if I have another recommendation for everybody is learn how to temper by hand. Go get a small piece of marble. Go get the two scrapers, an offset scraper and a spatula, and learn how to hand temper. Understand what tempered chocolate looks like and how it feels, and what the procession is from untempered chocolate to properly tempered chocolate. Right. The reason why is that you will be able to know if your chocolate is in temper, or be able to discover very easily if your chocolate is in temper, and if it's not in temper, how to go fix it. Right? Did it get too hot? Did it not get hot enough? Right? These are really, really important things to know. If you do not know how to temper chocolate by hand, even with it, you will not even be able to tell if your continuous tempering machine is tempering the chocolate properly. Right? You won't know until your bars bloom what's wrong with it. You want to know. Number one, learn how to temper chocolate properly by hand. Then what you can do is you can start examining, are there ways that I can do more chocolate with less effort? Yay, that's what we're looking for. So here is an example of a machine that will crystallize cocoa butter for you, right? It's about $1,000, right? So there is that. It is purpose designed. There's a French company called Status that does a similar kind of thing. It's about 3 times the price. But if you're looking for little devices to do cocoa butter silk, this is one way. I noticed I forgot to add in a sous vide option. Many people use sous vide. I will add that option in. Sous vide will be 20% of the cost of this, right? So you can probably do the sous vide for, well, under $300, a third of the price of a dedicated machine. It will have more capacity. That certainly is very, very true. But there's water associated with it. So you need to be very, very careful not to get the water in the cocoa butter or the chocolate. So just a quick note about that. So Mike is, yes, I'm trying to find a solution too small for 2 ingredient productions, right? Looks like the Keychalk may be a good solution. It could be, right? But Mike, I hope you understand where I'm coming from. And I believe that TCF Sales is the U.S. U.S. Distributor for this. And so what you may want to do is take some of your chocolate, go talk to Mike, not Mike, but Tom or Alicia. Take some of your chocolate down to Texas and run it through the machine if they have a demo machine to see if it works for you, right? But yeah, it's I can't tell you. Or it's like another thing. It's like, hey, Mike, do this, but you know what? Right, 1% cocoa butter for tempering. Right, add cocoa butter silk to the machine. It may solve the problem, and it's really all not that bad. I mean, the idea of just like a small amount of cocoa butter silk, maybe 0.5% by weight, that will get you the temper that you're looking for. Why not? Right. Oh no, it doesn't work in a continuous tempering machine because it's going to detemper, retemper. So not going to work. But right. But if you want to spend around 12,000 US dollars, the only continuous tempering machine that I know of that's got that kind of capacity, again, it's a 24 kilo capacity machine. You can run it down to 3 kilos, I think, and it'll stay in temper. Is going to be a way to a way to go, because you want, and then add a depositing head to it. So again, add a Fairbank Engineering depositing head to the key chock to do that work. If you are going to be doing silk tempering or hand tempering, although this is not, again, not the cheapest option, it is perhaps one of the highest performing. I would buy these over a mold art, which is mostly plastic, any day. So this is a Swiss company, Crea Swiss. They make a melter, which you can see, which is a 6 kilo melter. It's got a thermocouple probe in here. It's fully insulated around the side. I know somebody who worked with one of these machines. So you could get the chocolate, melt it in this machine, add the cocoa butter silk into the machine, and you are tempered, right? And you can hold 6 kilograms at a particular price. They also make a 20 kilo version of this, which is the one a colleague of mine used. So there is a US distributor, I'm sure. I don't know who it is. But this is the way I would go over a mold art or a smaller machine, right? So for holding chocolate at temperature or for general melting, right? That's what I would do that way. Now, again, if you're looking for like the least expensive machine in the market, this is not on the market yet. It's coming soon. You can send an email off to the maker of the machine. This is it's a replacement to a Rev 2, right? And so, in terms of capacity. So if you're looking for something which is like the least expensive approach and you don't need it today, this is the way to go. I'm not a huge fan of the Rev 2. It's very, very loud, right? So I wouldn't go there. If you're going to get a Chocovision machine, a bowl machine, I think that the Z3, a 3Z, is probably the way to go. I would get it over a Rev Delta just for the size of the bowl and its working capacity. The Delta is like 2,700 bucks. I think for the price difference, you're going to want the capacity. But again, if you've got a batch tempering machine like this, you are either flooding and scraping molds, or what you're doing is you're using some other plunger or some other mechanism to fill the molds. You'll put the mold on a scale and you'll hand weigh in the chocolate into the scale. Time consuming and inaccurate, right? So especially if what you're doing is you've got a 100-gram mold and you're putting 60 grams of chocolate into it, right? It's a recipe for spending a lot of time. So I don't recommend it, right? If you do want to go the batch tempering method, this might be an option for you. It's another FBM machine, the Quadro. It's a 10 kilogram batch tempering machine, but this has active cooling. So there's a compressor and it does circulate refrigeration gas through this. And so it's going to take melted chocolate. It will melt the chocolate up and then cool it off, but it will do it much, much faster than the Chocovision machine, which only has passive tempering, which means how long it takes to cool the machine off will depend upon the difference between the temperature of the chocolate. You start off roughly 45 C, and whatever the ambient temperature is, 20 C of the air. If the temperature in the room goes up, it takes longer for the chocolate to come into temper. This is an actively cooled machine. They do have a 50-kilo machine. It's quite big. The 10-kilo machine sits on top of a table, and you'll notice that there is a valve here, and you empty this by opening up the valve, and the chocolate comes out. Because of the way it's designed, this is like relatively easy to clean, right? It's not as easy as a Chocovision machine where I can have a bowl which is dedicated to dark, a bowl which is dedicated to milk. I can have multiple bowls and I just swap the bowls out. And I probably want to have multiple baffles so that I swap them out as well so I don't have to worry about cleaning. Um, I want to say last time I looked again, it's about 6,000 or 7,000 euros. But if you are looking for a small batch tempering machine, this would be the way I go. Obviously, no depositing capability at all on that machine. I'm going to jump around here a little. Now, I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time in this miscellaneous category. Almost everything that I've talked about in previous episodes, specifically the last episode. But I do want to talk about you're going to need work tables. And if I had a little extra budget, finding a work table that was actually a chilling cabinet as well, right? So what I could do is I could put my tempering, like a batch tempering machine or something like this, on top of the work table. And when I got a whole bunch of molds done, which were on a tray, I could put the tray in the machine. I could put the tray in the cooling cabinet. Now, this is not a refrigerator. It's not for dairy, right? It's not going to get that cold, right? Its maximum is 15C. Oh, actually, you could use it as a dairy, but it's if you had it cold, you wouldn't want to use it to cool things. 15C is mid-50s, which is perfect for chocolate crystallization. So I would, you can get 2, 3, and 4 doors, but if you got to have a work table. And so having something like this where you can have a cooling cabinet for crystallizing your molds, if it takes 20 minutes and you've got a 3 cabinet design, by the time you fill up this cabinet and fill up this cabinet and fill up this cabinet, when you get done, this one is ready to demold. Yay, right? And it's right where you're working really, really good. This is a splurge item, obviously. It's not something. But if I'm thinking about throughput and capability and my space is constrained, I would definitely get one of these things. I've had 2 clients who've purchased really expensive versions of this from Irinox. And it was what made it possible for them to work in the workspaces that they had at the time, right? So definitely it's something to consider when you're doing that. So we've talked about dehydrators, induction cooktops, thermal mixer. Why would I want something like a thermal mixer? Marshmallows, low temperature caramels, for enrobing and for filling and all that kind of stuff. It does roughly a liter at a time, but it's designed for the professional kitchen. So if I would want it rather than other machines, because I can program it and just walk away and it'll beep at me and tell me when the recipe is done. Right. So I'm thinking about that. I'm also, if there's a splurge item here, it's this induction cooktop. The reason why is there's a thermocouple and you can very, very precisely control not only how much heat you're throwing into it by changing the heat here, but the temperature that you reach when you go. So if you're doing hard crack caramel, things like that, which require very, very precise temperature, then this is a good way to go. And again, it's a lot more than like a $300 induction cooktop, but I think that it's worth it because of the thermocouple, right? It's a splurge item, not necessary. The other thing I want to talk about is if you want to do a storage room, if you want sort of like a walk-in, rather than buying one and paying a lot of money for oversized compressors, build one yourself with a CoolBot. There's a list of all of the AC units that you can do with that. If you want to do a really, really tiny space that you want to hold at a specific temperature, then this Triplite SR Cool is a way of blowing a specific temperature stream of air, which is dehumidified when you blow it in. And I think I mentioned that Paul Picton at Maverick had developed a cooling tunnel where he uses 2 of these things. It's a mold cooling tunnel. The other thing to think about is air quality. So this is an air cleaner, which is designed for a woodworking shop. This is ceiling mounted. So all of the air goes up, and there are filters in this. There's a company that makes electrostatic filters, which are going to be more efficient than these. So I'd recommend getting an electrostatic version if you can. Here is a floor mounted version of the same thing. It can be moved around. So there are many, many ways to go about doing this. Again, I'm not necessarily recommending this particular version. I'm just giving you an idea about what it is that you'd be looking for. There are versions of this that go in the ducts, right? So you can put this in the duct. So you're moving things around in the duct of your HVAC. And there's a link to a company that makes electrostatic filters. I know that I have used these filters on a project. We were building a line, enrobing line, and we wanted to have filters in front of the air intakes for the machine. And so we were able to get filter cloth and to be able to use the filter cloth and custom fit filters over what it is you're doing. Dehumidifiers are something you should consider. Keep the humidity. This is a floor mounted machine. You can move around. You duct it to the outside. This one will drain into a drain rather than having to remove a pan. It's good for 2,000 square feet. You may need more of these depending upon what the average humidity is, but this will get to humidity and set it. Also, you'll see that this is designed to work inside a grow tent. There are filtration in here that will help filter the air from spores. I mean, this is not a replacement for an air cleaner, but it's a supplement to an air cleaner. I am not certain if this particular work table from Technomac is humidity controlled. I do know that they used to make them with humidity control. I can't tell from reading if this is a humidity controlled cabinet, but what you can do is you can get desiccant packs. And so if you are using something like a wine fridge as a mold cooling fridge, what you can do is, number one, is put a hygrometer so you know what the humidity inside the room, the thing you want it to be 55% or below. And now what you can use these desiccant packs, which could be recharged just by putting them in the sun. You can put these desiccant packs in the wine fridge or some other fridge to control the humidity. So those are things that you are going to want. Finally, I mean, this is a company called Continental Plastics. This is the bad URL for Fairbank Engineering that I will fix. This is a roughly 2-inch fish container. So it's a food safe plastic. It does not absorb odors, with a lid, right? And if what you want to do is you want to block chocolate for aging before you melt it and temper it, this is a perfect box for it, right? Because it's relatively easy to break. If you were to put this in a relative, like a 4x8x8 hotel pan, where it's like, literally 8 inches deep, a quarter size hotel pan, number one, it will take a long time to melt, but if you're trying to chip it, it takes forever, right? So put it in this, right? Weigh it on a scale, put 5 kilos in this, block it. You can use blue tape and name things. They stack on top of each other. It's really, really compact storage as well. Again, it won't absorb moisture. But I learned about these first from Andrew Schatz of Garrison Confections. This is after he left being the corporate pastry chef for Guittard and moved back to Rhode Island. And he used these to deliver products to people. So if he was doing a caramel or bonbon or something like that, he would you can get these customized, the lids. So I believe he had Garrison Confections on the lid, and he would deliver all of the products to his customers, right, in these boxes, and then swap them out the next time that he did a delivery when he was in the local area. So I learned about that, 20 some odd, probably 20 some odd years ago, maybe a little bit longer ago than that. But I've had clients of mine use these for blocking chocolate and storing chocolate, and they become, really versatile multitaskers as well. You can buy them individually. You can buy them 10 at a time. I know people who bought them a pallet at a time. And the great thing about it is that you could buy different sizes of it, and they all use the same size lid in rectangular, or if you're doing round, they use the same size lids, which is a great thing to consider. Finally, right, I want to make some observations about selling, right? Because I think if you're starting up a craft chocolate business, considering, and you're not doing brick and mortar, right? So number one, right, if you're selling online, I think that it's really important that whatever you're using for a shopping cart online can also manage finished goods inventory. So you want to be able to look at the back end and now know not only how much and how many you've sold, but how much is sitting in inventory. You want to make sure, and you can enter inventory, right? So it knows when it's out of stock, right? So whatever you're doing with a front end shopping cart, make sure you can manage finished goods inventory in it. It will make your life a whole lot easier. Right. The second thing I want to suggest is that pay really, 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 really close attention to how much work it is to say, here's an order. How much work do I need to do to print a shipping label? Right. For me, this is one of the reasons I got out of the chocolate shipping business when I stopped, which would have been what, 2008, 2009, somewhere in there, because I was just spending way too much time doing data fixing to get it from the shopping cart that I was using. I don't remember what it is, to the USPS shipping label system. It's just way too much work, right? So think about finished goods inventory and think about what is it going to take to get a shipping label that I can slap on top of a machine. Those are the things I think about when selling online are two of the most important things that you want. Now, of course, you want to have a shopping cart system that will allow you to organize your products into categories and to be able to display the things you want to be able to do them. Ideally, you've got integrated sales tax tables if you need to collect sales tax. New York has like 40 something, maybe 60 something different taxing jurisdictions. I was in New York, and if I shipped to New York, I needed to collect sales tax. And it was a mess collecting sales tax, right? Calculating and collecting sales tax. I'll add that in. Sales tax management is going to be another thing that you're going to want to think about, right? So, do all right. So, focus on local markets and other local outlets that you can sell to. And one of the reasons why is I mentioned last time, which is you want to focus on building a basis of support in your local community that generates the cash flow that you're looking for, so that when you do start shipping farther away, especially wholesale accounts, when you get there, you have the cash flow to support it. Because if you can't deliver in person within an hour, which is roughly what I think of as when I think of local community, that what you have is the challenge of how much does it cost to support those larger customers, which are much further away. And it turns out that if you've never done it before, it's going to cost you more, right, than you think. Right. Now, take the business if it comes over the transom for free. If you got an online store and people want to buy stuff, go ahead and take that business, right? But focus on the local community and generating support. Think of yourself like a microbrewery does, a brew pub. They are focused on developing support in the local community before they branch out into distribution. Alcohol distribution is a lot harder in many respects than chocolate distribution. It's easier in some respects as well, from a licensing and other perspective. But if you go big too soon, I've seen more companies fall apart because of trying to go too big too soon. They didn't have the local support necessary in order to move forward. Right. Finally, what I want to also point out that even if you don't have brick and mortar retail, consider having what the people at John and Kira's in Philadelphia called a loading dock sale. So once a month, they would just open the loading dock door and they would do a blast out to everybody who is in the local community that says between the hours of 10 o'clock and 4 o'clock, we'll be here. And if you want to come and you want to buy stuff off the loading dock, we can sell you stuff off the loading dock. And so think about that on once a month, every other Saturday or every other Sunday, rather than, or in addition to going to the local farmers market, if that's what you're selling, right? That people can come into your shop, thinking of it sort of like as an outlet, right? So I'm thinking of bakery outlets where you're buying seconds or stuff that was left over that they couldn't sell or they didn't ship or something like that. So they would open up their doors on a Sunday. You can go and get bagels at half price. I'm not necessarily saying that you sell things at half price, but it is a good way to develop a local a local community if you're in a place where it's easy to get to from driving, which it was for John and Curious at the time. And I thought it was a really, really, really cool idea that they had in terms of that. And that's it. I'm not going to go over the miscellaneous stuff. Most of this stuff was covered in a previous episode, but I wanted to make sure that it was in there. Think about these things, right, as things that you need in terms of kitting out a small workshop. You are going to want these things. If you want to know more, go back to the previous episode and go take a look at them. Really important, something to consider. And with that, man, I think I am done. Mike, before we go away, is there something I missed in terms of the questions? Where have you got? What would you like? If there's something else that I can do, what is it going to be? Otherwise, I'm going to say thanks everybody for joining me. I've had fabulous fun doing these things and thinking about why I would make the decisions that I would make, and the recommendations that I do okay, Mike says he's all set. That's great to know. Thanks. Anyway, and that's it. So you've seen the banner, right? This episode of Pod Save Chocolate is supported by members of the Chocolate Life. So if you're not a member of the Chocolate Life, go over to the website right now, click a join button. There's always a free tier. If you do have the resources to be able to support the work I do, I'm not taking Patreon, not running network advertising. I'm not taking other kinds of sponsorships. Everything is supported by you, the members. And I can do that. Although I should point out that if you saw me show a piece of equipment on Amazon, it's an affiliate link. So if you purchase it, it will help support what it is that I'm doing here. And with that, I want to say it's Friday. And so everybody have a great weekend. And to point out that this coming Tuesday, right, which is the 25th, if I recall properly, there's going to be a preview episode for the 2025 Salon du Chocolat in New York. Right, so so people from the organizing group, Messe Frankfurt, are going to join me. We're going to be talking about what's new, what's updated, what people can expect. We're going to have some people who are going to be exhibiting or otherwise participating in the show to talk about what they're going to be doing and what you can expect. And also, if you're not a chocolate maker, but you are a member of the general public, we're going to be announcing a 25% discount code for general admission to the show. It's going to be announced for the first time during this episode, and it'll only be available for about a week. So we'll discuss. We'll give out what the code is and when it's going to be active for during the episode. And with that, finally, everybody, just a reminder as I close out every single time: if you're working with chocolate and you're not having fun, maybe you're doing it wrong. Until the next time, everybody, ciao.